Breaking news, this just in, the California Parole Board has denied Lyle Menendez parole. Of course, this decision coming down hours after this hearing began at 9 a.m. this morning, and the decision coming the day after Lyle Menendez's younger brother, Erik, 54 years old, was also denied parole by the California Parole Board.
So two commissioners made the decision. Again, after about 11 hours of testimony questioning Lyle. We have a lot of the details that we'll be able to release right now, but we're going to assume that because of what we read, details about violations of prison rules, in his case.
We can read them now.
We can.
Yeah.
We have cell phone violations, unusual possession of a pair of soccer shoes.
Well,
things like that.
Yeah, the parole commissioner for the Lyle Menendez hearing today explains the factors that she would review when it came to Lyle. She says the nature of the crime, Lyle's growth and change while in custody, while giving weight to both his age at the time of the crime and his age now. So considering all those factors, she has deemed him unsuitable for parole. In fact, she notes that the risk assessment found Lyle would face a, quote, moderate risk of violence if released.
Right, which, from reading all of this, it seems to be that they have to pose an extreme risk of violence in order to not be released. That moderate is within the rules, so to speak, of allowing this to be released.
So just because you're deemed moderate doesn't mean that you would necessarily be denied right out of the gate.
But also, historically, people with this kind of criminal background, with this kind of crime, don't get parole.
Right.
At least on the first time.
First try. And this is the first time because it was just in May that their sentences were reduced to the possibility of parole.
But it's also sort of uncharted waters because, I mean, I can't imagine any double murder in recent history where more than a dozen victims of the family members of the victims testify on behalf of the killers.
Right.
And you would think that would have an enormous impact on the parole commissioners. Now, we haven't heard from them directly, so we can't ask them that question. But there's just so many aspects of this case which are fascinating.
What we're still waiting to learn as it relates to Lyle is he up for parole in another 3 years, like his brother Erik? Erik, 54, Lyle, 57 years old. And then also, and I believe it was Lou Shapiro, the attorney who we just had on in Ed's piece, was saying that, you know, the hope would be then at this point, although they are trying to get a new trial, Governor Gavin Newsom, if he would step in and grant them clemency, which is highly unlikely according to legal experts.
Right.
Let's go back to Ed Lascos in downtown Los Angeles. You're outside Mark Garagos's office. He represents the Menendez brothers. Ed, denied parole, Lyle Menendez.
Yeah, not surprising to many people. I say legal experts who study this kind of thing because they were basing it on the situation yesterday and the line of questioning that happened to Lyle's younger brother, Erik, particularly the two different commissioners at the time then zeroing in on the time in prison, all those decades in prison, and the violations that came up with Erik. And we know that that was also part of the questioning that was taking place today with Lyle. We can assume because we're waiting for the complete transcripts of that at this point. So you got to think about it, and I found that interesting because you would think when you hear about a parole and a parole hearing, we've all been thought to think that, just keeping an eye on some of the folks walking through here at night downtown LA. In any event, when you talk about the parole, you always think about, well, they're going to be asking a lot of questions about the killings, about how you've rehabilitated yourself, about your feelings, your anger, are you a threat to society? But then the questioning, most of the questioning, which had a huge impact, as we know yesterday, with Erik's situation and his denial of parole, was simply about all those violations in prison, saying, well, you were locked up for all of these years. You did not play by the rule. You were not an A number one inmate. And that was a big concern. And the reason why the commissioner said because of that yesterday with Erik, that's why we feel you're a threat and we're not going to grant you parole. And we know part of that, we can assume, was the questioning today with Lyle. So that I found very interesting that, certainly they look back at what happened back in 1989, those grisly murders, but it's really about what the brothers have done since then in incarceration. You know, there's been stories about how they've helped other inmates, how they've helped them with their studies, how they've helped them get their degrees and all this kind of stuff. But as the attorneys have been telling us, that's one side of the story, the good side of the story that we hear about the Menendez brothers. But there's always two sides of the story, and it's something that only the board, the parole board and the commissioners have themselves, is that history behind bars and those violations, which are very telling, and in the case of the Menendez brothers with these two denials, very damning in their attempt to get some freedom.
A couple of quotes we want to share with our viewers and you as well. I'm sure you've read through some of this because this was some of the pool reporting from the LA Times that we had access to prior to getting this official decision. Lyle talking about him, how he views himself, and he refers to himself as a peacekeeper. He said this today. Quote, I would never call myself a model incarcerated person. I would say that I'm a good person, that I spent my time helping people, that I'm very open and accepting. I'm the guy that officers will come to resolve conflicts. So that's one quote that we have. This is about his relationship with his mother. When asked about sexual abuse that he suffered at the hands of his mother, and he says this: there's so little love in my relationship with my mother that was overt. We'd sometimes have these moments of connection. I get that it's abuse, but there was a lot of love in it. I know when I talk about it, someone else is going to use it as an abusive event, and I don't like it.
Not really clear what that was referring to. And Ed, you were talking about the parole board grilling Menendez. They talked about getting witnesses to lie during his trials, the shopping spree that he and his brother went on after the killing. He talked about whether they asked him whether he felt relief after the murders, which all of this seems to be relitigating the murders, which I keep hearing they weren't supposed to do. They were supposed to talk about how are they today and are they an unreasonable threat to society.
I think, though, you could make the case that maybe that leads up to where you're going, Phil, and what your thoughts might be, that it's supposed to lead up to where they are today. But, you know, where we've come in the past is where we go in the future, if you will, if you buy into that way of thinking. So they have this horrible situation, how they have dealt with it, where are they at now in their recovery? You know, is there some peace? Is there still a violent tendency? Because you remember, one of the tenets of the parole commission is really to, the state parole board is really to talk to the inmates as they come up for their possibility of being granted parole, to determine particularly, and bottom line, are they still a threat? If we let them go, we give them our freedom. And think about it, when you've got some inmates, in this case, two brothers, and you know, you've got to be very careful because you know they've committed double murders. Yeah,
and getting back to what Phil was saying about the spending spree that they went on after, the parole commissioner today asked Lyle if spending and having, quote, flashy things helped him cope with his sorrow, and he says it helped him feel good in the moment, lifted him out of, quote, this anguish. My life had just collapsed without my parents.
So here's something, Ed and Marla, that is going to throw a real monkey wrench into all of this, because as we've been reporting, strict rules on how this whole hearing is held. There's no live feed, there's no video feed, there's audio feed. Somehow the parole board erroneously released audio excerpts that other networks have aired, and over the objections of Lyle's attorneys and Erik's attorneys.
And we know that on the record, as opposed to it was leaked, because
this is what the LA Times reporter, who happens to be the pool reporter, was there, is telling us. And so, is it possible that this may be used as a way to invalidate the proceedings? I'm just raising that as, I guarantee you this is going to come up going forward.
I can imagine Mark Garagos using this.
I mean, I don't know what the grounds would be, because it doesn't affect the specifics of what happened when Erik and Lyle were behind bars, but at any rate, just another complicating factor in a multifaceted case. Well, you would think Mark Garagos would be all over that. You know him very well, as I do. He's one of the best at what he does, and he will, he'll take any angle. And his angle certainly has been he wants both of these brothers freed, released. He's been a huge supporter of their story and what's been going on. So yes, I would think anything he can find, any chink in the armor, if you will, is the way he's going to go. Also, if we have another moment, when you talk about the state parole board, it was an
interesting point that our attorney Lou Shapiro made. We were talking to him earlier. Is that think about the precedents this would set. You have a high-profile case like this. You've got two brothers, double murder of their parents, and then possibly you set them free. Under what guidelines? Does that change the entire system where you have other killers, convicted killers, coming up looking for their parole, saying they have been rehabilitated, and you're opening the floodgates? That's an argument, a theory that's been going around in the legal circles, which is rather interesting. So there's a lot at stake here when you think about the entire system and not just two brothers.
Sure, but I mean, the theory obviously is that every case is handled individually. That's why I have this rotating system of 21 different parole commissioners. The other thing that fascinates me, among many things, is that we haven't heard much detail about the psychological evaluations that are part of this whole process. Well, the threat assessment that the governor ordered, because these parole commissioners aren't psychologists.
Right.
You know, they're trying to get inside the minds of Erik and Lyle and say, okay, if we release you, are you going to go, you know, shotgun someone else or not? And I mean, that's the bottom line. And so I'd like to really figure out a way to learn more about what psychological evaluations were done and what the details of the risk assessments were. And so far, that information isn't really out there.
No, simply that he was deemed moderate risk.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, they haven't said that. I don't know if we're ever going to get that, but you know, I look at it as a sense of they kept centering in on the years and the violations. We've been talking about that over and over through all the decades that the Menendez brothers have been behind bars, state custody. And I guess you could make the point, the debate that one of the attorneys was saying, is that you would look for a steady record, a steady progression of saying, right, that I'm doing it by the rules. Look at, I've changed my ways. Not only am I a peacemaker, I'm helping other inmates, but I'm also, you know, working and, okay, you don't want me to use a cell phone, I won't do that. You don't want me to do this, I won't do that. So you establish a record, a lifestyle, if you will, and that is something that we've heard the commissioner say, at least yesterday's decision, and no doubt in today's decision, that played a big part in denying the parole.
Yeah, and speaking of the cell phone violation, I mean, we know that Erik was also in violation of a contraband cell phone, and so was Lyle when he was caught in 2024. That violation meant that he cannot have family visits for 3 years.
Yeah, and well, also what's interesting about listening to the details of these violations, and this might be construed as an excuse, but they committed them when they were in life prison for life without the possibility of parole. So they're, you know, that's what they were saying. They're thinking, yeah, I'm going to break a cell phone rule. I'm never getting out anyway. Now, if they had known they had the possibility of being released, maybe their behavior would have been different.
Well, that's what Erik said yesterday.
And so the commissioners are essentially holding that against them. Like, you should have been a model prisoner, right, and followed every rule regardless of whether you had any hope of getting out.
Yeah, because that would translate into when you're free, how are you going to handle the rules?
Right.
But correct me if I'm wrong, that last violation with the... Okay, I'll let you guys go.
Yeah, we have...
No, stay with us.
Yeah, we have attorney Dimitri Gorin on the line. Let's get your reaction to this. Are you at all surprised by the fact that the day after Erik was denied parole, his older brother Lyle is?
No, I'm not surprised by the outcome. I think that the parole board was going to treat the brothers the same way. I think yesterday it definitely told everyone that the older brother's not going to get released. He was older, he was more sophisticated of the younger brothers in getting parole. I did not expect that the older brother would as well.
So you, you know, you spent your career before becoming a defense attorney with the DA's office, LA County DA's office. I mean, what does someone have to do to qualify for parole? I mean, you have to be perfect?
Phil, perfect question. The reality is, again, taking a big picture and step back from this, I've been doing this 30 years, both as a prosecutor and defense lawyer, is that people committing murder just do not get out on parole. It's very, very rare, unless there are medical issues or you're like well into your 70s or 80s. So if you look at the track history of getting parole, the bottom line is the state acting as the parole board doesn't want murderers walking our street. That's sort of a decision the parole board has made. So yeah, they're going to look for technical violations. But if you look at historically, people getting out on parole, they're not people that committed premeditated double murders for financial gain.
Let me get your thoughts on the news that came out which led to why it took so long to get this decision, the procedural delay, if you will, where the LA Times pool reporter who was there and providing the step-by-step of the hearing says that someone on the parole board erroneously sent out the audio tapes. If you're Mark
Will that be an issue?
Are you going to do something with that and say, hey, this is all moot at this point?
Well, I mean, look, if there are procedural violations that violate the privacy of the participants, perhaps you appeal, because at this point, the parole board decision, while it's final in terms of the current hearing, they have the right to appeal. And a parole decision is usually not final until 120 days.
Right.
So you use that fact to say, look, my clients have had their rights violated, and we want a remedy. And the remedy is either give us a new parole hearing or reconsider your decision. And then try to maybe bring that up in the trial court, because I also understand they file a writ of habeas corpus in the trial court seeking a new trial, and they can say, look, our rights were violated at the parole hearing. It's another reason to get a new trial.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and from what I understand, and Marla, we've seen this kind of buried in there, but because that audio was supposedly released erroneously, that some of the family members who were planning to testify on behalf of Lyle
today
chose not to because they didn't want their private emotions and feelings broadcast, which sort of goes against the fact that they all had plenty of news conferences that we all carried, sharing their emotions publicly. But still, so yeah, the chief counsel of the parole board, I believe that's their title, has 120 days to review this whole process. And as Dimitri was just saying, could make a decision that changes things.
But bottom line, Dimitri, it sounds like Geragos will use this as an even bigger reason to appeal.
Listen, when you're a defense lawyer, you work with what you have. Oftentimes, you don't have much. He's been given a gift. It's a violation of the parole rules and perhaps people's privacy. And so you argue what you have to say, look, they deserve a new hearing or they deserve a new trial. Get us bail, get us out of prison. As a defense lawyer, you're going to do everything you can for your client. And, of course, it would be proper for him to raise these violations that the state committed.
Do you think they should be paroled?
My experience, look, I was a prosecutor. I prosecuted people that committed murders, and also I've defended people that have committed murders.
Right.
I think that the unique part about this case, two unique things. A, allegedly victims of sexual abuse. I don't know how valid the sexual abuse claim is. I question that.
Right.
Obviously, if they're victims of sexual abuse, that makes me want to say they should get parole. But it's not something they raised when they were arrested. It's sort of like a claim that just, on the one hand, in my mind, might have been made up. The second issue is youthful parole. That's a new issue in California, new law. And people that commit crimes under the age of 31 have a youthful parole hearing. I have had a lot of clients sentenced under that, but they're still sort of waiting for their parole date. If the state has made a decision to give people youthful parole hearings, then the parole board should really give that a lot of weight, because before, when they weren't releasing people convicted of murder, that youthful aspect was not really part of their decision making. The issue I have with this case is how much weight did the parole board actually give their youth? Because the state legislature has made that a larger factor, a bigger variable. And it's not clear to me, they're looking at the cell phone violations. I get it. But there was no determination and no weight seems to be given to their age, which is what the state is now saying should be given great deference.
I thought it was 26. You said 31, but we could double check that. But your point is well taken.
Well, the point is, at 31, you can apply. I have clients that have, say, committed a murder at the age of 19, and they can start applying at the age of 31.
Okay.
Here, they definitely were under the age of 26. I don't know exactly, but they were younger.
18 and 21,
so and the state has now said, look, you have to give the age aspect a lot more weight than before, and I just didn't hear the parole board give that any consideration or any serious consideration. It seemed like the focus was, okay, they were in there for life, they violated, cell phone rules and perhaps other issues, but the weight of the evidence is, look, they were very young, and what the parole rules say is, it's actually included in the parole regulations, is people under the age of 26 have a different sort of brain chemistry, and social science has shown that because they're not full, their brains aren't fully mature, you should give their age a lot more weight. And that wasn't considered by the parole board, from what I understand, and given that great weight. So I'm wondering why that wasn't considered.
And what about the fact that, like Erik, Lyle will be up for parole in 3 years, and they could have gone as, I believe it's 15 years for the next parole hearing. They could have made that decision to wait 15 more years. To your point, if you commit a double murder, it's highly unlikely you will be paroled. I mean, do we just go through the song and dance of all this again just for the sake of it?
It happens all the time, guys. It happens all the time that people that have life sentences are going up for parole hearings and that they don't get released. So you're absolutely right. That's how the system works. Unique thing about this case is it's high profile. So you have the Menendez brothers, this horrible murder in Beverly Hills, but the reality is the other 99% of the cases that people are convicted of murder or sitting in prison, they're not getting paroled. It's just people are obviously focused on this case. You have the elephant in the room, the sexual abuse. So it's very sad and tragic if the sexual abuse is true and they're still sitting in prison.
Well, I heard a really interesting comment today by one of the legal experts that was talking about this, that depending on your own life experience, like an older generation that I guess I would put myself in, that lived through all this, terrible shotgun murders, right? Prison for life without parole, lock them up, throw away the key,
Spending
absolutely.
spree, yes.
Then the younger generation that may not have been even aware of it or alive then or paid attention then, and then they saw the 9-part monster series on Netflix, very sympathetic to the brothers.
Plus all of the TikToks.
Now that generation has much more sympathy. Let them out. So it's really kind of divide there based on your age, your sort of life experience. And then we go through this whole thing, and let's say the decision is yes, then it becomes a political issue because the governor can just reverse it anyway, which seems to undermine the whole process.
So let's just get clarity on Newsom right now. So the only way that this would change the course of their fate would be to grant the both of them clemency. Is that right?
Right. They can get clemency from the governor, which is probably unlikely. He's running most likely for president in the next election cycle. And then B, they can apply for a writ of habeas corpus, and my understanding is they have already, to the trial judge, Michael Jessic, and then that trial judge can make a decision that, hey, they didn't get a fair trial, this evidence should have been introduced, therefore give them a new trial, reverse the convictions himself, and then give them bail. That's another way for them to try to get out.
Yeah. Dimitri
Thank you so
Gorin,
much.
yeah, you're great help. Thank you so much for jumping on the air with us.
Sure, guys. Of course. Thanks for having me. Have a
we'll
great
talk
night.
soon. More for sure on this.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So new tonight right here, people at a barbershop in Linwood locked the front doors when ICE agents tried to detain someone inside. This was yesterday. Yeah,
the agents eventually gave up, but not after rattling the community members who heckled them to get out. Let's go live to Fox 11's Chelsea Edwards in Linwood with more. Chelsea?
Well, it's now viral video, and it's caught on multiple angles. There was a crowd that quickly grew. Now, while they were wearing vests that say police, they didn't identify themselves as with any particular agency. So we're checking to see exactly what agency they were with. But as this crowd grew, the tension grew, and the whole thing quickly escalated. Take a look.
You gonna hurt? Y'all gonna hurt him like that? Garcia, open the door. Garcia, open the door. Open the door. Open the door. Open the door. Yeah, that's you. You guys here? No, Garcia, I'm gonna go back to your dad.